Welcome to episode 254 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing South African screenwriter Sean Drummond, who just did a South African Western called Five Fingers of Marseilles. The film was written for the South African market and shot in South Africa, but heavily influenced by the American Western film. It's a fascinating look at a non-USA filmmaker and how he and his team were able to get their film produced. As with a lot of the filmmakers who come on this podcast, it took many years and a lot of effort to bring it to fruition. So stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking or sharing it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 254. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Again, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I am interviewing South African screenwriter Sean Drummond. Here is the interview. Welcome, Sean, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Hey, Ashley, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So to start out, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa, where I am now. And I guess from right as a kid, my grandmother was a writer, actually. And so I've been interested in writing from a young age. My brother and I would make short films, and we could take it with friends on weekends and shoot films in the back garden. And we had mini franchises, running as 12-year-olds of different films. And then I detoured when I left school and got into my sort of late teens, and then when I was in varsity, I rediscovered writing again and found my way into a screenwriting stream, and that was where I actually did a degree in screenwriting in the University of Cape Town. And while I was there, teamed up with a lot of the creatives who I work with now, Michael, the director I work with predominantly, and then our whole sort of creative core filmmaking group. We did a couple of films together while we were studying, and we started our company BFAD Motel right out of university, off the back of a couple of big pipe dream projects. It didn't really come together at the time, but that was about 10 years ago, and we've been running our company, I think, for 11 years now.
Okay.
And that sort of brought us to where we are now.
Okay, perfect. So maybe you can just describe for us a second, because I think a background running a production company like that is such great training for, moving into features and that kind of stuff. Maybe you can talk about just briefly, like what is the bread and butter for a production company like that? How are you guys actually earning a living to run this thing?
We've been through different incarnations of the company. In the beginning, we were trying to be a film company specifically, and we, as 22, 23-year-olds emerging into the industry, we had one project that was way too big. It was a Greek mythology-inspired serial killer film that was also a dark fantasy set in a post-apocalyptic wasteland city. So you throw in everything that you love on those early projects. And we spent a good two and a half years trying to get that made in South Africa before realizing, one, it was way too big for us to be able to handle at the time, and also probably too big for the South African industry, I think, to be generating at the time. And we branched off. We realized the company would have to start turning over, so we did corporate videos, branded content commercials, some MTV stuff, and then from there we moved back into short films, and now eventually back into feature films. So we've we've gotten to where we wanted to be as a company in the beginning, but it's taken us a while, a sort of roundabout route to get back here. I write predominantly, make most of my living as a writer for the company and outside of the company.
I see. Perfect. So let's dig into your latest film, The Five Fingers of Marseilles. Maybe to start out, you can give us a quick pitch or a logline for that film. What is that movie all about?
Sure. So the film's a South African Western in Sotho language, which is one of our national languages here, and it's really a modern day South African film that draws on the conventions of the Western but translates them into a modern South African context. And it's a story of Tau, who's in the tradition of the Western, he's an outlaw figure who comes back to his hometown after having run away for 20 years after a terrible event as kids that he caused. And as a kid, he was part of a group called the Five Fingers, who were fighting for the freedom of his township community attached to a small town in South Africa. He runs away, comes back, and finds that the town has freed itself, as has South Africa transitioned. But as much as it seems like everything's changed and the town is booming, the longer he's there, the more he realizes things haven't really changed, and this town's caught in a new pattern of oppression. There's a new threat, and he's really pushed to the point where he's got to decide whether or not to get the gang back together and fight to free this town once and for all. And I don't want to give away the ending, but I think that the ending has lasting consequences, and it's a bit of an allegory in South African politics as they are today.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
going to blow my nose quickly.
No, not at all. So
I'm-
where did
I'm-
this
I'm
idea
fighting.
come from? Like, what's sort of the genesis of this story?
So Michael Matthews, the director, and I guess we've been Western fans for a long time, and we also love making genre films that speak to South Africa today, but that also travel and speak to a global audience and a sort of global storytelling consciousness. And the starting point for this story was we were traveling around the country researching for another project, and we started passing these tiny little towns with European names, like Marseille, which is, obviously after the French city Marseille, and a Barcelona, and Rome, and a Hamburg, and a Berlin, which are all these tiny towns in South Africa. And we found it so surreal that these towns were dotted into this epic landscape that looks a lot like, the Westerns that you've seen on the big screen. And the history behind it was part of what's most interesting, because obviously South Africa has this colonial history, which is, tragic and barbaric and sort of really raw and still carries a lot of pain. We still feel the effects of a lot of pain. So the idea that in these towns were established as sort of colonial outposts, homages to where settlers had come from, Marseille or Barcelona or Rome, they'd come and they'd, planted flags, taken land, and they'd put local people, indigenous people into townships, put them to work, railways, and so on. The story of colonization everywhere. And the idea that a lot of those old towns have sort of now crumbled into almost nothing. The townships that were attached to those towns have grown and become towns in their own right. It's almost like a new frontier, but that means going through the birthing pains of, what freedom and new frontier sort of come with. And we did about 5,000 miles around the country visiting these small towns and putting together the story that would become Five Fingers for Marseille, the bones of that story. Also location scouting, because part of that balance between being producers on the project and being the writer is knowing what you're writing for, and knowing that we would have X and X amount of budget, and we wouldn't be able to build a town out of nowhere, so we'd have to find something we could shoot around, trying to find that one place that's exactly what you're looking for. And in those 5,000 miles, we found one town, which was called Lady Grey, and that became our Marseille in the story. And we stayed there for about a month the first time, where I broke the story, did the first outlines, spent a lot of time, wandering mountains, wandering streets, meeting people, listening to stories. And we also, because it's one of the most cinematic places I've ever been. And we would chat to people, and we would chat to farmers and go, this is what we're doing. We're doing a modern contemporary Western. Is there anything you can think of that would make a great location for this movie. And they're like, oh, you should go and look at the abandoned railway line. So we would follow an abandoned railway line up into the mountains until we found a tunnel to nowhere, essentially. And the story behind it was that they'd been planning on building a bridge over a valley. They got as far as putting a tunnel through one of the mountains on one side, but then the ship that was carrying the parts to build the bridge sank off the coast of South Africa, so they never finished it. So there's this perfect train tunnel with the line running to the end of it, and then it just stops. Okay, great. We've got to put that in a movie. A vulture gorge, and all these quite iconic scenes in the movie really come from out of the weeks that we spent there just scouting around the space, and then really going, okay, we've got this amazing bank of elements and ideas. Let's weave them into a story that's compelling and resonates, and then has some sort of truth. Because really, what we were trying to do was make something that was a true Western and a true ode to the Western and the Westerns we love, but at the same time making something that is really authentically South African and speaks to the South Africa we know today.
It's interesting. I've had some other European filmmakers on, and now yourself, an African, and you guys actually seem to understand and appreciate the American Western better than most Americans. It's kind of, in here in the U.S., it's kind of a forgotten genre. I mean, obviously Quentin Tarantino has done something to sort of revive it, but it's not something that me and my film geek friends discuss very often. And I'm curious, that sort of leads me to my next question. How did you know that a South African Western would travel outside of South Africa? Like, how did you know that this would be something that other people would be interested in?
I don't know that you ever really know, but I think you believe. I think when you believe in something. And this film took us 7 years to make, and I think the reason we pushed it so hard for so long because we knew it worked, even when people didn't quite see it. And we pitched it a lot, and we pitched it a lot in South Africa. And it was funny because we had a lot of enthusiasm around the script and around the story, but also nobody really wanted to get involved. We sort of got, we love it, we don't quite see it. Which is it's tough to hear, but you sort of understand it because it's almost something you can't comprehend until you see it. We pitched it outside as well. We pitched it in the States. We came to New York a couple of times. We co-produced it with a company from New York and then called Game 7 Films. And I think when we pitched the first time and had these really enthusiastic reactions stateside, then we knew that we had something that was working. We also pitched the XYZ Films, Top Line and XYZ Films really early on. They were very enthusiastic as well. So I think we got enough positive feedback in it to believe we had something there. And then sometimes you just have to swing. You have to go, you know what, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. We just have to see it through because we believe in it. It's funny what you say about understanding the Western, because it feels like the Western's actually having quite a big resurgence right now. It feels like everywhere I look, there are Westerns coming out. There are a few more South African Westerns even coming out now, which is quite cool to have been the first in the new wave of South African Westerns. But we really went deep into the Western, and we watched sort of classic Westerns, spaghetti Westerns, revisionist, neo-Westerns across the whole spectrum, looking... Obviously, that you want to sort of tip your hat to films you love, and there's some Unforgiven, Once Upon a Time in the West, some High Noon, some Wild Bunch in there. But I think what we wanted to do was try and get into the themes of the Western and really try and get to the heart and the soul of what a Western is, and looking at those themes of conflict, because all stories conflict. But what I love about the Western is that the story is the conflict, and it's sort of such pure film storytelling because it's towards man against man, man against himself, men against the land, men against the passage of time. There's four sort of pillars of Western storytelling. We try to sort of appeal. We try to draw on each one of those and have each one of those play out in our story in a way that was really sort of core to what the film is. And I think the first draft of the script was probably a good 8-9 months. And the first draft of the script was a 200-page tome of this this hugely expansive world that was probably really badly overwritten because it was a first draft. But a lot of the process was distilling those 200 pages down into the final 100-page version that we shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about your writing process a little bit. You mentioned that you worked with a director on this who you've worked with before. Maybe you could talk about a little bit of that process, going through this, working with a director that you're close with. Certainly he's putting in his notes. How do you incorporate his ideas into your script? Maybe just talk about just the logistics of working through that and kind of how you guys do it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, we've sort of worked together since we were at film school, so I think we have a very good understanding of the sort of stories we each like to tell and how we tell those stories. And so that first process was those 5,000 miles was really on the road, talking through the story, talking through ideas as we went. And then once we had, and generally in the process, once we have an understanding what it is we're trying to do, I will go away and I will write and I'll outline and I'll treatment and I will share ideas as we go. But I like to be in a sort of protective writing space until I feel like something's ready to share. With Five Fingers, the first thing I wrote was actually the prologue, which is the first 15 minutes of the film happens when all the lead characters are kids. And I wrote that and I shared it with Mike and some of the other team and said, this is the tone of what I think we should be going for, what the world is. Am I on the right track? And when the feedback on those first 15 pages was super positive, then I moved on to the next stage and wrote pretty much. I don't think I shared anything until I'd written the first full draft and took notes back in on that. And it was, I have to say on this one, it was actually a really easy process. And we would talk about specific beats and moments in the film. But I think probably what's in the final version of the film is 70 to 75% of what was in that first draft. Obviously, taking into account the scaling down and the trimming of storylines that didn't need to be there. Yeah. It's a good process. Yeah.
How do you guys, if there's a difference of opinion, how do you guys handle that? I mean, there must be the inevitable thing where you feel strongly about one thing and he feels the opposite. How do you get through those moments?
I don't know if we just are very accommodating collaborators, but I think between the two of us, and then the other two strongest creative voices when they came on board were Asga and Yaron, who are American co-producers. And between the four of us, we were really able to debate points in the story, even when there were really strong disagreements. And really sort of heated disagreements too, because storytelling is passionate, and everybody, and I think the industry is, you want to be working with passionate people who really care and who feel strongly about their opinions. And we would disagree, and when if we couldn't come to a resolution that everybody agreed with, Mike and I had the creative control, so we would make those final decisions. But I think it's always you want to be on the same page with your collaborators about the film you're making. So I think we tried not to go to bed angry, quote quote. We try to agree, and I think because the aim was making a story that would really resonate with the most people. Usually the person who heard the best, most reasonable argument won, I guess. But it didn't happen often.
Okay. Yeah,
it didn't happen often, surprisingly.
So as you're going through this process, you've got yourself and these two other producers and then your director. What does that development process look like? Did you had your 200-page script? Did you send it out to some other people? Do you have other trusted writer friends? Were there other collaborators? Maybe talk about what that looks like, just your development process on this.
Sure. Yeah. So we had quite a lot of trusted collaborators. We actually got quite a lot of coverage on the first two drafts of it. So we sent it out, got it covered, incorporated a couple of those notes into it. And the process of rewriting, I think I would sort of do, in the first couple of years, I did 2 or 3 drafts a year. And then as we were originally meant to go into production 2012. and it came together and fell apart. Then it was 2014, it came together and fell apart, and eventually it came together in 2016. And between each of those, I did one solid rewrite of it. There was a point where because we were trying to finance between South Africa and the States, there was a point where we tried to do a version that was drastically cut down budget-wise. So I tried to do a rewrite of the film that took out half the elements, half the characters, to see if it would make it cheaper, but it just didn't work. It just didn't have, any of the depth or the sort of layering of the version. So we scrapped that, went back to it again with the full version of the story. So yeah, I mean that was really the process. It was getting good notes. I've got a trusted network of writers here and filmmakers that I reach out to, and I get feedback, and then the same thing in the States. Okay. And yeah, I mean that was it. It's funny. I really like the process of rewriting. Because it is the process. Writing is rewriting, and I really enjoy trying to look at something I've written and figure out how to make it better. And it was strangely fluid. I don't know if maybe this project was just, we got lucky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree. I enjoy the rewriting process too. So what's your approach to screenplay structure? Blake Snyder, Sid Field's 3-act structure. Are you just more, fast and loose, intuitive? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, especially with a Western. I'd be curious to kind of hear how you approach the structure of this film.
Yeah, it was, sorry, I've had the flu this week, which is why I keep sort of blowing my nose. This was interesting because there are a lot of parts in it. There's this very long prologue. There's a classic 3-act structure to it, and then there's almost quite a long cut at the end. There was a time when I was looking at it almost as sort of a 5-act film where you've got a prologue and a coda with a 3-act in the middle of it, but then also it has to function as a 3-act film at the same time. I think I'm more intuitive. I think you have to know structure and you have to know rules to be able to work within the sort of confines of what telling a story is. But I've always sort of believed that good storytellers intuitively know that your story needs to have characters set in a world. Your story needs to have an event that sets something in motion, An inciting incident is, telling stories around a campfire. Your story has to have a character, something that sets the story for an inciting incident. It has to twist and turn and it has to resolve itself. So I outline a lot, and I like to write from characters. So what I normally do as part of my process is I will write character bios that become these very long, pages long sort of stream of consciousness, emotional journeys that the characters are going through the course of the film. 5 Fingers, there are the 5 Fingers who are the title kids. Tao is the lead, and then 4 essential characters. But then there are another 4 or 5 characters who intricately sort of entwined with them. And so for each one, I did a very long character, a character journey. And then in my full outline, it became weaving each person's arc together into one overall arc through the film, and that informed the structure. So in a long roundabout way, I guess it's intuitive, but film storytelling follows rules for a reason, or follows structural.
So let's talk about, and it sounds like this was an ongoing process as you're trying to raise money, you're rewriting the script and then going back and forth. But maybe you could just talk, even in just broad strokes, what was your approach to actually raising the money? And I know nothing about film finance in South Africa, so I'd just be curious to kind of hear how something like that works. I know in Europe, there's a lot more government agencies that, you can get grants through those. In the U.S., obviously, it's all pretty much business-based, through the studios. But maybe you can talk about what was your approach, and just in general, how does South Africa film finance work? And then specifically, how did it work for you guys with this film?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix here. So we don't have as good government funding as the Europeans do, but we do have some government funding. On this film, we had our National Film and Video Foundation put a portion of the budget in. We've got really great tax incentives here. So we got just over 30% of our budget back through tax incentive. but otherwise, money in South Africa is a little bit hard to come by. They're one of the broadcasters does invest in films. They invest generally quite a good amount of money, but they turned us down 3 times on this because they just didn't see it. um, and we had long roundabout misadventures with private financiers here who led us on. There was one who, over 2.5 years, led us on the wildest goose chase you can imagine. Signed the deals, popped the champagne with us, shook our hands and said, "I can't wait to do this with you." And then when push came to shove, just didn't put the money in the account. And
yes. You don't crack the champagne until the money's in the account. That's the lesson learned.
Oh my God, there's a longer version of the story that's probably too long for this call, but he really left us high and dry, and in the end, I got a phone call after 2 weeks of no contact when we had a crew on standby and we'd been ready to go into pre-production. But obviously stalled because the money didn't arrive, and the call basically said, "I'm so sorry, my business is tanked. Maybe we can do this next year." So, okay, sure, man.
Yeah.
So what actually happened was the bulk of the finance came out of the States, and that was through Game 7, through Asgen Euron, and some of their finance connections. And it was amazing to us that something so South African, in South African language, would capture the interest and the attention, and ultimately the sort of the pockets of American financiers. But it did, and hopefully there are people that we'll work with again, because I think everybody's really happy with the film that came out. Ultimately we had some money out of South Africa, a little bit of private money, government money, tax money, and then American equity.
And what's the gist? And what's the gist of getting that? You said the National Board of Film and Video or something. You got some portion of your budget. What's the gist for getting that money? Is it just applying through some procedure? Is it knowing the right people that are giving out that money? Maybe you can talk just to that a little bit.
Yeah, they have a portion of money they have every year, and the job is really to stimulate and develop the industry. So they have mandates, a lot of mandates around transformation of the industry. I think a lot like what's going on in the States. It's been an industry run by white men in South Africa. So the industry is trying to shake that off, develop a lot more filmmakers of color, a lot more female filmmakers, be a lot more inclusive. They fund shorts, docus, they fund festivals as well, and they fund film development and production. So any project can apply for up to R1 million, which is just under $100,000, or 1.2 million, I think it is now. So just under $100,000 worth of production money, which is not a huge amount of money, and a smaller portion for development. It's a fairly rigorous application process you go through, because they get a lot of applications coming in, and they can only fund so many projects.
Sure.
This was the first film project of ours that had been funded by them.
Okay, perfect. So I always like to just wrap up the interviews by asking people what they've been watching recently. Are there anything that you've seen TV? I know at least here in the States, we're really in this golden age of TV, but any movies you've seen lately, maybe just tell us those, and we can maybe check those out.
You know what I've been watching religiously just right now is BoJack Horseman on Netflix. I'm a huge BoJack fan. I love it. I love the writing. I love the characterization. I just think it's such a great TV show. I watched a film called American Animals, which I don't know if you saw, and I can't think now who directed it. Or who was in it, which is going to frustrate me because there are a couple of really good names in it. But it's a sort of hybrid documentary feature that I just was really smart, really interestingly done. And it's based on a true story about some college kids who tried to steal this really what's the word? Like really not expensive. Valuable book from the university library, and how the heist sort of went completely belly up and ended in disaster. But I thought American Animals was really great. I watched BlacKkKlansman, which I actually liked a lot. I thought tonally was quite it was tonally quite uneven, which felt like it must have been deliberate, but I felt like it veered quite wildly between something that felt quite rooted in realism and drama, but then it would veer into these almost blaxploitation sort of scenes and moments that were fun but didn't feel like they quite came from the same film. Um, overall I enjoyed the watch, but I thought there were a couple of moments where I sort of raised an eyebrow. I thought, well, that was an interesting decision.
Perfect. Good recommendations. So do you know what the release schedule for Five Fingers of Marseilles is going to be? Do you know when it's going to be released and how it's going to be released?
Yeah, so we've done a few theaters in the States so far. We've done screenings. We've done a couple of weeks in New York and LA, Atlanta. We've been in Texas. We've been in Arizona. We were in Tucson. I think we've been in Houston and maybe Dallas. And the theatrical, I think, is coming to a close over the next couple of weeks. But we've got a big digital, like fully wide digital release coming up on the 23rd of October, which we're super excited about. What's been great is we've been getting amazing reviews. The Wall Street Journal, New York Times, LA Times have really, really come out and praised the film, which is super exciting for us. So I think we're hoping to make a big impact. I know we're on Amazon, iTunes, and other digital platforms, 23rd of October, nationwide.
Yeah, perfect. So what's the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing? Twitter, Facebook, blog, anything you're comfortable sharing, I will round up and put in the show notes.
Yeah, our company's got a website, bephatmotel.com, which is phfat, bephatmotl.com. Five Fingers for Marseille has a Facebook page. We've got a short film called Apocalypse Now, which is out as well. And that's a proof of concept for a feature that we're in development with right now. Apocalypse Now, it's based on a book, South African book by an author called Charlie Human, and that's just this deep, dark, supernatural dive into an underbelly of Cape Town that nobody's seen before. But you can actually go on Facebook. Apocalypse Now is a very South African way of saying sort of a little bit later on. So it's a play on Apocalypse Now. But there's a 7-minute short film you can check out there. That's also had a lot of really great buzz, and that's probably the next big project we've got coming up. Otherwise, some TV shows, and generally, Five Fingers has been a really good kickstart of a storytelling machine that we hope is going to be putting out a lot of stuff that you'll be seeing over the next couple of years.
Perfect. Well, Sean, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day, and I guess now well into your night, to speak with me.
Yeah, Ashley, thanks, man. This has been great.
Thank you. Good luck with the film, and I'll talk to you later.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can read a short bio on each reader on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, character, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline and synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase this service as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your screenplay gets a recommend or a consider from one of our readers, you get to list the screenplay in the SYS Select database, which is a database for producers to find screenplays and a big part of our SYS Select program. Producers are in the database searching for material on a daily basis, so it's another great way to get your material in front of them. As a further bonus, if your script gets a recommend from one of our readers, your screenplay will get included in our monthly Best of newsletter. Each month we send out a newsletter that that highlights the best screenplays that have come through our script analysis service. This is a monthly newsletter that goes out to our list of over 400 producers who are actively looking for material. So again, this is another great way to get your material out there. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing British filmmaker Jim Hosking. He just did a film called An Evening with Beverly Lough Lynn with Aubrey Plaza. We talk about this film and how he got himself in a position to write and direct it. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. That's the show. Thank you for listening.